Welcome to It's About Time, where we challenge outdated higher education models and push for bold, student-first reforms. This season, we're asking a big question. How do we make college cheaper? And there's no better person to help us explore that question than today's guest, Peter Smith. Peter has spent his career building and rebuilding higher education systems, from founding institutions to serving in Congress to writing books that challenge the status quo. Today we'll hear about his newest work in progress, making higher education affordable for all, ending knowledge discrimination. Well, Peter, thanks for joining me. I think this will be a fun conversation. You know, so much of the affordability debate focuses on things like financial aid and loan forgiveness, but you've argued that the real opportunity lies in how we deliver education, and I think that opportunity is exploding for us now to think about the role of delivery of education in price points and affordability. And why does the delivery innovation matter so much to affordability? And how are you thinking about that these days?
Well, it's interesting, David. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. But what I came to understand about 15 years ago is that the academic model we have for traditional higher education is an economic model, and it's also a cultural model, and it is a function of an information poor society that needed to collect all these resources in one place in order to have something called a college or a university that you could go to. And as we've exploded the number of people going, and as those institutions have matured since the rise of the whole meritocracy movement in the 40s, it has just become increasingly unsustainable, in my mind, in most cases, given the way it's organized. So that leads the question as to what the new delivery models that we have, or the new models for access, um, can have. They are a learning model, I call them an academic model, but they can have very different economics. And we can talk about outcomes based and competency based and all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure we will. But the bottom line is that if you do not have the cost structure of a campus to support, of the sunk cost structure of a campus, and you simply start uh, with the idea of getting the right content in front of the right people at the right time in their lives with validated learning outcomes presented in a way that is accountable, uh, then in fact you can have a very different economic structure. Um, and I hasten to say this is not, for me, a criticism of higher education uh, per se. They've done, we have done collectively an amazing thing in the last 70 years in America. But that isn't going to be the only model, and it has been the dominant model, and it's created a hierarchy with experiential learning at the very bottom and community colleges just up and all the way up to the Ivy League. And I think that whole thing is about to get laid on its side, and because what employers are caring about now more than anything is, uh, can you do the job? Do you have the socioeconomic behavioral skills? Do you have the cross-cutting intellectual skills? Do you know the content of the job, accounting, whatever it is? But they're paying attention to these other, what you used to call soft skills and cross-cutting skills, and that's what they want. And frankly, if somebody has all three sets of skills, they're a liberally educated person, in my mind. So anyway, I think we're in for some big changes.
So what have been the barriers? You know, we've talked about competency-based education. We've talking about doing away with seat time. We're talking about affordability that, is driven by a focus on outcomes and, factoring in experiential learning and other opportunities. Are the barriers to us moving forward more rapidly cultural, or are they regulatory, or are they a combination of the two? I mean, what's holding us back from fulfilling this? I think it's an obligation, and we're hearing it from employers and from students in terms of how do we get them skills and knowledge they need to get a return on their investment. What are the barriers you think at this
I,
point?
I think the barriers have been primarily cultural. And I can say, obviously, when I started the Community College of Vermont, back in 1970, 71, there was far less regulation. One of the reasons I went in to that space with such confidence was because there really weren't any regulations at the state or the regional level that said I couldn't do a college that didn't have full-time faculty. Um, so we did it, and it worked. But as I've come to understand, when I went to study afterwards, I got my doctorate after I left that presidency, because I was only 24 when I took it, and the whole thing, and I was actually the best candidate for the job, which tells you something about the pool. Uh, but, but anyway, and I realized that what we had done right, however inadvertently it might have been, was create a culture that was bulletproof. It was learner first. Did they get what they came for? Not that, yes, degrees and yes, certificates, but if I came to take 3 courses to learn how to do one, if I'm telling you I got what I came for, then the college had succeeded. So we weren't being measured just by degrees or certificates, but by satisfaction, which was, when we started looking at it that way, over 85%, even back in those days. And so to me, and when I went to study, I realized that the culture where you have within the academic world on a campus, even within a department, you have different instructors or faculty members, professors, in their classroom with the door closed, teaching the subject the way they thought it should be taught, evaluating the learning the way they thought it should be evaluated. And you could have very different, 10 people teaching the same course, and you could have very different learning experience in each of those 10 situations. And so there really wasn't the kind of quality assurance. And over the years, what I think technology has brought is really multifaceted, but on the one hand, a kind of consistency, so you can have consistent content, and you can have an assessment of learning that is in fact a learning experience in and of its own right, where you are doing a project and you're showing you can apply the content, but you're also showing critical thinking and being evaluated, or problem solving, or writing, or numeration, and you can show teamwork and appreciation for diversity and those things. So you can do all that in a very consistent way with learning outcomes that are quite consistent, but at the same time you can have a very, John Dewey wrote about communities of inquiry, where if you get everybody together and they're talking, you can have within that consistent framework, you can have communities of inquiry where people online, given the technology we have, can now interact with each other and ask each other questions. So in many ways, a blended or hybrid or all online learning can become, in some ways, through its more consistency, it can be as good as, or I think actually seen as better. Now, will there be exceptions to that? Yes. Do I want a brain surgeon who hasn't already worked in an internship? No. And there are all sorts of exceptions to that, but in general, across the board, I think it's culture that was and most of the change until the last 7 to 10 years had to come through an institution. I call it from the inside out. But what happened, and what Clayton Christensen captured with his theory of disruption in my mind, was that when the environment around the institution changes, then the institution needs to change. And then when it came to higher ed, the information poor society that made a campus necessary, that society is now information rich. And so most colleges are going to have to adapt or go out of business. And at the same time, their employers are feeling much more. You look at the information from the Georgetown Center for Learning and Work, and the data that's being collected, the change is coming from the outside in, and colleges are going to have to adapt, and it's going to be very controversial in some cases. In other cases, new colleges are going to come along. In other cases, we see apprenticeships and internships. People are learning and earning, and I understand many colleges are now giving credit for Google certificates.
Right.
Why? Because employers trust Google certificates and they represent a level of knowledge in a particular area that people trust. So,
I think,
yes, I
yeah,
think its culture was the big inhibitor. It is, but it's now changed dramatically.
yeah, you're
And I,
making some wonderful points that are consistent with certainly my point of view and others that are trying to navigate this new space. We used to go somewhere to learn. We don't go anywhere to learn anymore. Learning comes to us, and as learning comes to us, is it designed in a way that is accessible? And I really like your point about meeting my own individual needs as a learner. Our learners come to us with different expectations and different reasons for being here at the institution, not even being at the institution, but being in a learning environment that allows them to fulfill their own goals. And we're going to have to be adaptive to those student-centric kind of orientations. And for some, I find it's the path of least resistance to a credential that makes a difference. And for others, it's a very specific goal to get very specific skills and knowledge, and we have to be adaptable to that. So
well,
I think that's wonderful. Have we
I'll just
made any progress in experiential learning and actually being able to document the impact of experiential learning
oh,
on the overall cost?
we made tremendous strides. I think that the barrier, to the extent they still exist, the barriers are at the institutional level in terms of who will accept what and how much, because there's still real pushback. But I was on the founding board of CALE back in 1971,
Right.
72. And I used to joke and say I got my doctorate from Harvard, but I got my graduate education on the CALE board because I was serving with Morris Keaton and all these incredibly knowledge, Arthur Chickering and all these people who were just pros. And I was this 25-year-old kid who landed this job that no one thought would work. So they have done an incredible job of building the knowledge base over the years. There are some new organizations that are coming along. One is called Education Assessment Service, and they're using an AI-supported thing to uh, assess experiential or prior learning. And the fact of the matter is that we're going to be able to do that in a way institutions can still accept it or not, or some of it or not. Employers can look at it, and EAS, these guys can do it against job requirements. So it puts the learner in a position of going through college to a job or to a job and then to college as they need. Uh, but if you think about it, take the military. If I'm an E9 in the Army in supply chain management and I come out as a vet, there's a whole documented set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that I've been promoted up to and been competent at uh, that can be absolutely appraised, along with all sorts of other learning I may have done in the Army. We think that it's all about guns and bullets in the Army. That's 15%. The other 85% is all sorts of other things. Same thing with government employment. When you think about the service system in the federal government, um, where you can be whatever level 10 in the Environmental Protection Agency. So now you've got a certain level of sophistication and you're in the Environmental Protection Agency. Those things, again, are all written down. If you have, so we have a basis, and I think once we can analyze that data and describe what it is we think it qualifies a person for to do, what they already know for advanced standing, et cetera, with general education requirements and elective requirements built into certificate and associate and baccalaureate degree programs, there's without even fooling around with the majors, there's all sorts of room to bring that kind of learning in and save people time and money.
It will certainly save time and money. And we're fighting upstream against a currency that we understand. The currency is Carnegie units and courses. And anything that's a smaller grain size than that in terms of mapping skills and knowledge and applying that to certain use cases, especially around employment, is hard for academics to get their head around
That's right.
because we've all lived in a time-based Carnegie unit, fixed time, where time is the constant and learning is the variable. Do we see that shifting? And is that pressure coming from employers, coming from new opportunities with new technologies? I'm very optimistic, but my colleagues remind me I said that 10 years ago. How do we break through?
Well, I think employers are key to it. I also think new ability. For instance, there's another company called Ellesmere, and what they can do, say a college has in its online or blended program, it has 10 different contracts with technological providers, an OPM, this, that, onboarding, financial aid, whatever it may be. And they can harmonize all that without getting rid of any of those contracts into one integrated system so that depending a person in the college, a student, a faculty member can get everything and not have to go in and out, in and out, in and out. And that creates the connective tissue that a campus used to create, because you go on a campus and well, that's where the jobs office is, that's where the library is, it's where the laboratory is. Now we're getting to have the same capacity. So to me, it's going to be, again, what colleges choose to do and not to do is going to be up to them, and that is as it should be. I'm not into the government or anybody else telling a college what it must do. I do believe that there will be alternative pathways. I look at this, for example, Cal State Monterey Bay, where I was for 10 and a half years. The new president, I think it was her, she's wonderful, has just implemented a sort of learn and earn program. She started with recreation management with Pebble Beach Company. And so X number of students get an internship there, I think starting as juniors. They get paid, they get credit for the internship, they study on campus, they have a year-round residence on campus. During the summer, they work full-time. During the academic year, they work part-time. And if it all goes right, they not only get their degree, but when they graduate, they have a job. And the apprenticeship, the move towards apprenticeships is huge. And I think, given the expense of college, if I want to be a cop or a teacher or a fireman or a nurse's aide, or maybe in some cases a nurse, and reasonable people can disagree, there may be others, but you don't make enough to pay back your student loans within 15 years of getting your certificate the old-fashioned way. If I can figure out a way to blend college and applied learning with job-based learning and make a little money, and I end up with a baccalaureate degree after 6 years, but I've got a job, I've been a teaching intern, I've supported a teacher or a nurse. I think there's new models just coming all over the place that are going to be much more economically necessary, and it's the necessity that's driving the determination of feasibility. And if it doesn't work, people won't hire those people.
Right.
I mean, that's the ultimate accountability, isn't the brand, the tattoo that a degree gives you. The ultimate accountability is you're good at your work. And
I
I
and
think
and
that's
I
shifting.
Yeah, I've said on that one of the things that's holding back competency-based education is a more aggressive movement to competency-based hiring. We hear a lot about competency-based needs of the workforce, but at the end of the day, there's still a tendency to hire based upon the reputation of the degree, the generic reputation of the degree, and as we get more employers focusing on a system to evaluate competencies and skills that is reliable, I think we're going to see more of a move towards competency-based
Amen.
hiring, which will drive more competency-based education. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk.
Sure.
We haven't talked about the buzz of the day, AI and AI tutors and adaptive courseware, and the role that that's going to play on reducing the cost, but also changing the the role of faculty members. How do you see that evolving over the next? I used to say over the next couple of years. I would say over the next 6 months
Yeah,
to a
I
year.
mean,
We see it moving so quickly that
well,
universities are not going to be prepared for that changing possibility or opportunity for faculty members.
it's going to be very controversial. It's going to be very difficult. And I think the thing that I've learned when you're like both with Community College of Vermont and then again at Cal State Monterey Bay, and then with University of Maryland Global Campus, when you're doing something for the first time, you're going to make mistakes. That's that's how you learn. And the fact of the matter is, what you got to do is say, I wanted to do that, I did this to do that, it didn't work. How do I change this to get? I mean, and the whole notion, what I call it now is when I'm talking to people about an innovation, describe your outcome. Where do you want to be? What is it going to look like when it works? And then reverse engineer the process so that, because what we so often do in faculty and institutionally driven change is we start with a committee, and the committee sort of talks around the table, and they can go all over the lot and never get, because they never knew where they wanted to get to begin with. And so if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. You know that old saying. So with AI, will people make some mistakes? Yes. I mean, it's in, and are there some dangerous applications? Yes. And will there be falsification of papers and stuff? Yes. I mean, will those things will get sorted out. But what I'm seeing, to your point about the teaching and learning process, is that one of the greatest problems that online education has had, or non-institutionally based education has had, is that the learners are isolated and they're lonely and they don't feel listened to or heard. They don't have a sense of belonging. And so one institution I worked at, which will remain nameless in this case, we did some research and we found out that 2/3 of the people who didn't get what they came for, in that case it was a degree or a certificate, left for non-academic reasons.
Right.
And we didn't have, and then I realized that had been the case every place I've worked, that rather than saying, recognizing that as an individual adult learner over the age of 28, whatever, I got all these other things going on in my life. I need to feel respected. I need a sense of belonging, engagement. And I'm seeing AI, another company I just heard about called Brain CX. They've got a voice model AI tutor, can just engage the learner, and at any time if the learner needs to talk to a real person, they can. So, I mean, so you're all these different things that are creating what I call connective tissue. Campuses had connective tissue, and the online environment has not had that kind of stickiness, that connective tissue, the town square where everybody meets, and the student union, whatever it is, And now we're beginning to see, coming from multiple environments, and what they assert at Brain CX is that the retention and persistence and follow through, because there is a voice who's talking to them and responding to their questions, not telling them, but responding, and then they can get a real person if and when they want. Everybody is happier. I think AI is going to be, and it can, remember back in the day when MOOCs first came out, David, and that's when I knew the world was going to change, because I was at Kaplan at that point, and online education was considered to be highly suspicious and all that. And I knew that what we were doing, I mean, we just, a year later, got accredited for 10 years by HLC. I mean, we knew what we were doing, but our reputation, the reputation of online learning, plus in that case, unfortunately, being for profit, really turned people off. Okay, that's life. But when the MOOCs come on, you got Stanford and MIT and Harvard and
Right.
Duke and whoever, putting all their courses online for free. Their mistake was thinking that constituted an education. It didn't. That was content. But I said, oh my God, with all the best content in the world, theoretically, could I just start a college around MOOCs if I had the
Yeah.
advising? And sure. And then labs came online and all the rest of it. So to me, figuring out how to, or am I listening to the learner say what I need and then finding that learner the course they need and giving them 5 choices and letting them pick the one they like the best. Those kinds of things. AI, which is structured, it isn't open-ended, can do that. And I think they can do it today.
I think those are great observations. The irony that the technology itself is able to facilitate connections between individuals and eliminate the sense of isolation that we've seen in the online environment it's hard to get your head around. But it's also really exciting, that the agents themselves that are AI generated are the connective tissue or can play a major role in the connective tissue of these institutions. And we're seeing that explode. The
And
opportunity is right before us.
and it and it changes. It doesn't eliminate the human role.
No.
If anything, it makes the teaching side. So rather than me being, as we used to say, the sage on the stage, I mean, I have content knowledge. I might be doing it for a living, or I might be a professor or an instructor. But my job is now to engage with learners and help them think about things and learn how to reflect on their learning, because I've come to understand with the assessment of prior learning and using assessment as an educational tool, not a judgment tool, which is all an exam is. I don't learn anything from an exam, I just get tested. But that reflection is the process of extracting meaning from experience. So I've had this experience in my life, or reading a history book. Okay, what did I learn from that? What did it mean to me? What did it tell me? Okay, or I had a failure, and I lost my seat in the Congress. What did it tell? What did I learn from that? I'll tell you, I learned a lot. Like I was in the wrong business, but and got to go back into higher education.
Yeah.
But the point is, if we can focus on creating knowledgeable and reflective people who learn throughout life, we used to treat higher education as like a sidecar on a motorcycle. My life is the motorcycle, and I've got this little sidecar. Then I jump in that for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years, and then I jump back. Now I see the whole life experience. Learning is part of the life experience, whether it's formal or informal, now or in the future. It's all in one place. And that just radically changes the way we understand our lived life, as well as any formal learning we may do in college or elsewhere.
So let's take I have one final question for you. Like as we look ahead, what's one thing that institutions can do to take advantage of the opportunity before them? I mean, and what do you hope they do in advancing a more student-centric agenda in higher education?
Wow. Well, boy, there's so many places to start, and you said one thing, but I think
We do too.
the, the critical thing is to understand where we started, the cultural difference, and to create an independent part of the college. Might still report to the president and through the president to the board of trustees, but would have its own chief executive officer and its own structure, and developing its own culture. Because if time and time again, when you see an institution try to upgrade their continuing education or create an online program, a lot of them fizzle. And they fizzle because they think that this is just an extension of what they've already done in the classroom. And it isn't. It isn't economically, it isn't education, it just isn't as it isn't. So I would argue that the first thing to do is think about an independent entity that is still under the control of the Board of Trustees, and that will vary from situation to situation. I think the next thing is to maybe write a mission statement, but I would hire the leadership staff, and it's a risk, and tell them to put together the plan. In other words, don't use the old cultural people to create the new culture's plan or the new institution's plan. It just doesn't work that well. So you're risking 6 to 8 months of 4 or 5 people being on the payroll, and it may be another 12 months before you start. So you got to have some money in the bank and all that. But what they did at Cal State Monterey Bay, and that's where a lot of that learning came from, they had a 5-year plan. We had to start the college within 9 months of getting to the campus, which hadn't been fixed at all. And that was a real challenge. But we knew that we weren't going to learn how to do Cal State Monterey Bay with service learning and outcomes-based education and all these other innovations. We weren't going to learn how to do it by thinking about it. We were only going to learn how to do it by doing it. So we knew we weren't going to get it all done by August, and we then recruited students and we said, you're going to be pioneers. You're going to help us create this college. If you want a traditional education, there are 20 other CSUs you can go to. If you want to come and help us build a college for the 21st century, come on along. And we got 620 of them, just amazingly durable people. But we were selling them the opportunity that existed, not some fiction about a college that was ready. And the system on this, in the public system, and in the mid-90s in California, could be very different today. They gave us enough money we had to hit a per student, the system-wide per student average cost by, I think it was our 5th year or our 6th year. But up to that point, we had some extra money. We always had to justify the expenditure. I couldn't just go throwing things around. But so we had some protection. Frankly, I think 3 years would have been enough if I were a private institution, because you're not worried about a per student FTE or any of that. You're interested in generating revenue. And there might be some other things, but those would be the things I'd start with. Independence is critical in hiring people who have experience in what they're doing. The Community College of Vermont, now 4 times since I left, out of 6 presidents, has hired people who were from inside the college to be president. That is considered to be usually not good practice. But the fact of the matter is, they were the ones that knew the culture and believed in it. The board was right every time. And that college last year educated almost 10,000 Vermonters in 12 learning centers with no campus and no permanent faculty. More Vermonters than all the other public institutions in the state combined.
That's
I mean,
there's some proof there.
so it's,
Yeah,
we needed the protection.
I really thank you for that advice. I think it was very very concrete and right on target was where we need to running an institution now who has that level of independence. I can appreciate that observation, and that we can do things that are not able to be done at traditional places. So I think that innovation is going to come from those places that have the innovation and the will to move in that direction and create those kind of cultures that you so describe so well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I can't wait to see the book. What's the timeline on the new book?
Well, we're shooting for next March. The working title at this point is the Learning Revolution, Ending Knowledge Discrimination. And the whole point is that the ability for us to capitalize on validated learning wherever, whenever, and however it happened is emerging, and that is going to change. That is a revolution equivalent to the GI Bill. In 1942, what, 5% of Americans had a BA? And that has shot up, but the gap between people without a college degree and people with the income gap is something like 20 times what it used to be. It's just horrible. We can change all that if we start recognizing the learning that people do, and we give them respect and we give them inclusion which I think some of the political fissures we see in this society are a result of the economic fissures that this unintended caste system of higher education, and it wasn't intended that way, but it has had almost a caste system approach, and we're about to lay it, as I said in the beginning, take all that and lay it on its side, and small d democratic.
I cannot wait for it to come out, and I appreciate your time doing this today. Thank you.
David, thank you, and good luck with all your endeavors. You're into some great stuff.
Well, that's it for today, but the conversation doesn't stop here. If we want real change in higher education, we have to rethink the way we measure success. Share this episode and stay tuned for more bold ideas and candid conversation on It's About Time.